Welcome back to the Anti-Meta Club. This week, Rseat is the return of the most difficult combination that I've ever had to find an anti-meta car for, but this time I did a much better job. Let's get into it. Group 3 at Daytona means one thing. The Ford GT and the Peugeot VGT are absolutely untouchable. Last time I used the brand new Supra, but this time we're moving to the old 90s GT500 Supra, and it's actually a lot better than the modern Supra. It isn't quite as good as either of the two meta cars, however it does save fuel a bit better, and with enough practice you can make it handle the infield just as well. I managed to set a 144.2, however I can definitely do a 44 flat. Drifter was able to set a 44 flat with it, however B-Racer was able to get a 43.8 because he's amazing. My 44.2 is only good enough for 232nd place, however it is the second fastest one on the leaderboard at the moment, and like I said before, there is a lot more time to be found. While there are a few other cars on the leaderboard, it's really ridiculous how dominant the Ford GT and the Peugeot VGT are. As you're starting your lap, look up on the right for this digital flag marker, and at that point, that's when you're going to turn in. You want to aim for this white line, and right when you get to the end of it, that's when you hit the brakes. Turn only slightly and aim for the end of the black wall in the distance. When you get to this white line right here, that's when you're going to start trail braking in. You should be at full brake before that. Still holding good brake pressure as you're turning in. Once we get to this color change in the pavement, that's when we're going to downshift a second and really finish the trail braking. You should be off the brakes by the time you get to this inside barrier. Apex after that, make sure you're in third gear before you get on the throttle, and if you have too much steering or if you're too aggressive on the throttle, you're going to spin the tires. Do not do that. It really kills your momentum with this car. As you're crossing over the pit exit line to get in position for braking, take note of the one marker on the right as well as the light post on the left. I use this little mark on the ground that you're going to see for my braking point, but the one and that light pull are going to be more visible when you're in the race. Start trail braking in right as you pass the cones on the right, and you should be coming fully off the brakes right when you're about at the middle of the corner. Be very gentle initially in third gear and don't give it full throttle until the car's accelerated enough that the tires will not spin. Any understeer will turn into oversteer, and any sliding of the rear tires is going to absolutely destroy your momentum. Like always, if you're sliding at all and you hit the exit curb, it's going to make you spin. Position yourself to the right and stay full throttle on this left-hand kink, making sure you use the curb on the inside. Once again, there's a mark on the ground that I like to use for my braking spot. However, if there are people really close in front of you, you won't be able to see it, so you're just going to have to approximate where you are on the track based on the other things that are around it. Once again, the final cone is a good place to start turning in. You're going to stay full brake until you get to about this mark right here. Then second gear, trail brake in. I made a mistake when I got on the throttle. It's very similar to the last corner. Any kind of sliding is going to slow you down a lot. This probably cost me at least a half tenth, if not more. Move yourself to the right side of the track before you get to this first of two access roads, and on the second one, once again, there are these nice little marks, and that's exactly where I like to brake. Turn in and immediately start trail braking once you get to the yellow curb on the right. You want to hit this inside curb right here, however, there is a really big bump, and it will unsettle your car. Make sure you're not steering too much. I was, which caused a little bit of oversteer, so I had to correct that. In order to make sure I didn't continue sliding, I had to then steer straight at that wall, which is always going to be an option. There's such a long runoff after that corner that if you make a mistake, it's more important to keep your momentum up and drive straight at that wall until the car's settled, and then you can steer yourself back to the line. Speaking of lines, you want to have your left tires on the yellow line on all of the banking here. Coming off the banking, you want to get all the way to the right and start looking for the number boards that are hanging on the fence. After board 2 is a nice digital flag marker, and after that is a nice white mark on the ground, a little white line. When you get all the way past the white line, that's when you want to start braking. Turn in at the 1 mark and immediately start coming off the brakes just a little bit so you can continue turning. You want to hit pretty much a straight line between the two yellow curbs. Once you get off the first one, we're going to get back on the brakes, making sure we're controlling the front end of the car, and then get back on the throttle as soon as you can. Make sure you start turning in for the exit before you get on the throttle, or you're going to get some understeer. For the exit, make sure you've got your two right tires on the yellow curbing, or you will get a penalty. If everything went smooth, just make sure you're not turning to the left of the yellow lines, just put your left tires on it, and you should be good to go. I've actually had a few people tell me that they thought it was faster to go up to the top of the bank, because in theory they're going to be steering less, so that should cause less friction. However, it's a much greater distance, and the friction of turning here definitely does not add a lot. So yeah, just stay on the yellow line. If you want to get like a half mile per hour more, you can go up top at the beginning of the lap, which is what I did, but it's not really necessary. Alright, going through at full speed. Again, we're going to turn when we get to that digital flag marker. Here we want to brake almost in a straight line, and when we do finally turn in, we've got to make sure we don't use too much brake pressure because it'll cause understeer. Understeer will turn into oversteer, and any oversteer with this car is going to slow it way down. By far the trickiest part of using this car here is trying not to slide using third gear to exit the corners. The trick is to use just enough throttle that the car is actually moving faster by the time you get on full throttle, and when the car is moving faster, it doesn't have enough power to slide the tires. If you've ever driven a powerful car, then you know that when you're moving really slowly, or of course when you're stopped, it's really easy to slide the tires. However, when you're going faster, it's almost impossible to slide the tires. That speed difference from how fast the car is going to how fast the wheels want to travel is what makes the difference in accelerating out of corners. Like I mentioned before, it's totally fine to take a really wide line if it means you can get on the throttle a lot earlier. You should take a slightly tighter line just for more efficiency, but if you can get on the throttle, or if you have to fix a little bit of an oversteer moment, then it's totally fine to just drive straight at the wall because you're going to be having a lot of momentum when it comes to the straight, which is of course really important. The bus stop is very difficult. It's really important to carry a lot of speed, but you want to slow down right before the right-hander and then get back on the throttle and stay on the throttle. The longer you can make the straights, the longer you can stay at wide open throttle is really important. Back to what I was saying about sliding the tires. Essentially, when you're coming out of a corner, at the slowest part of the corner, you're going to be the most susceptible to sliding the tires. So just get yourself going a little bit faster before you get on full throttle and you should be totally fine. There are more factors at play, but that is a conversation for another time. Alright, on to the race. I actually did quite a few races, 3 of them in fact, with this car on Monday during my stream, and I didn't really have great luck. I was trying a fuel saving strategy so I didn't have to take any fuel, and that actually does work really, really well. However, I wasn't really paying a lot of attention. I don't know why I wasn't paying a lot of attention, but I wasn't, and I didn't do it well at all. In fact, I had a huge surplus of fuel after each one of those. In a lot of the other races, I didn't even try to fuel save because it makes the car too slow, and I don't know why I didn't consider it, but when I logged on last night to get one extra race just trying to make this work, I realized I hadn't actually just tried to go for it with this car, just to wind it out and take fuel if I needed. It turns out that was the best for me personally. I think that it actually wouldn't be too hard to save enough fuel and stay within the slip if you really wanted to, but I had to take such little fuel that it didn't really make that much of a difference when it came to the pit stop, and I still ended up in front of people who were pitting in front of me. With that said, I actually wasn't able to save that replay, and I need the replay for my thumbnails, so I decided to do one more race, and this race was actually even better. I realize I said actually like 50 times already. I'm going to try to stop saying actually. Now you might have noticed that I checked up before going into that turn 1, and that's because a lot of people usually hit each other on turn 1. And because I checked up, I was able to get in front of one person. It looks like they just got right back in front of me, but it was still a good idea. One of the worst parts about using an anti-meta car in this race specifically is that the other cars, especially the meta cars, are going to be able to take off. If they make a mistake, they're going to be able to recover pretty easily, but this car and the other non-meta cars are not quite as fast. With a lot of positions being changed, I ended up losing one to our buddy Girthquake, and he's someone that I know is really fast, and I also trust him as a driver, so I decided to slot in behind him and hopefully follow him, working together with him in order to achieve a really good result. That ended up being a very good idea. Now, as you can probably tell, the Mustang, driven by him as well as Outlaw behind us, is very good. It has pretty good grip as long as you don't give it too much throttle. It's fast, it's got a lot of power, but there's just one reason why I chose this car over that. Actually, there are a few reasons I chose this one over that one, but there's one main reason that we'll get into a little bit later. Now, hopefully you've been watching everything that's happening while I've been talking about just peripherally related things. There's a lot of stuff that goes on in the first lap. People are jockeying for position, a lot of people taking an outside line versus an inside line and vice versa, and so you can expect a lot of carnage, but luckily this wasn't that bad at all. People just moved around a lot, and for the most part there weren't a lot of incidents. I believe I finished 4th last night, and that was almost entirely because a couple people took out half the field on lap 1. Now, this was actually a really foolish move. I really wanted to get that position, and I probably could have if I'd braked just a little bit earlier, but I braked way too late, and Leandro was able just to take his position right back. Sorry, I think it's Leandrinho, which I think means like little Leandro. Someone who speaks Brazilian Portuguese can probably correct that for me. Because of all the failed moves that I was making, and because I got kind of caught up behind Leandrinho, I lost another position to our buddy Qualify LOL. Now, I was mentally prepared for this next move because Quali is really aggressive. He's very aggressive but very controlled. He's a very fast driver. And anytime someone makes an inside pass, actually anytime anyone makes a pass at all, as long as you follow really closely, it's going to shut the door for whoever's getting passed, and you should be able to slip right in, assuming that you're close enough. The most important thing in this race is finding some kind of slipstream and bump drafting partner. There are some weeks where bump drafting for whatever reason reduces your SR. This is not one of those weeks. You can safely bump draft anyone you want. It's better to have a train of 3 cars. It's even better to have a train of 4 cars. But as long as people aren't hitting each other or trying to pass too much, you're going to have essentially infinite speed. If people are trying to pass a lot, it's actually going to slow you down. So if you can find someone who's going to go into the pits, you can go into the pits pretty much any time after lap 2, regardless of the car you're in, and you should be able to take enough fuel to make it to the end of the race. But if you find someone going to the pits and you trust them, follow them in, because it's going to be much better to have a drafting partner than it is to be driving by yourself. Even if you're much faster in the infield, you're probably not going to make up enough time to make up for the fact that you have so much more speed when bump drafting with people. You're pretty much never going to be going faster to slower, a situation where you're going extremely fast to extremely slow than T1 on this track. So that means it's dangerous. Be very careful, and of course look for opportunities to pass people. I wasn't actually planning on passing Quali, but for whatever reason he went wide. It was maybe because he was avoiding the people in front, or because he just braked a little bit too late because of the overspeed. But either way, look for opportunities, and of course don't be too brave, because bravery only works to a certain extent. It's really easy to brake too late like I did with Leandrinho, and that was the best case scenario. He just took the position back. Worst case scenario, you run into someone, ruin your race, ruin their race, get a penalty. It's not what you want. It's almost always better just to be cautious there, because it's not very difficult to catch people in the middle of the track. Especially if you can just stay within 1 second. By the time you get to any of the straights, then you're most likely going to be able to stick with them because of the slipstream. I feel like I've been rambling today while making this video, because I'm realizing now that it's lap 3 already. I hadn't even noticed it. I'm in 9th place at this point, and Girthquake is in 7th place. Now, like I mentioned before, I thought it was going to be a really good idea to try to follow Girthquake, and as you can see, it was. Not only is he going to be able to punch a hole through the traffic and I could potentially follow him, but when we get to a point where we can bump draft, I know that he trusts me and I trust him, so we can safely bump draft with each other, and it's going to be a lot faster than either of us driving by ourselves or trying to bump draft people we don't really know. One thing I talk about pretty frequently is moving in the braking zone. It's really important that once you've applied the brakes, you're not moving, because if someone is going to try to brake after you, they're not going to be able to change their direction while braking. And what this Freda guy did was hit the brakes and then move directly in front of Girthquake. But unfortunately for Freda, Girthquake was planning on braking later, which he could because he was a more efficient braker. That caused him to hit Freda, which caused a big pile up, and that ended up making Freda lose multiple positions. Not only did he lose a place from me, but Wya's game tried to make a pass too. They collided, and because of all of that, he ended up losing 3 positions. There's pretty much no drama until we got to the bus stop, and unfortunately Mikey Moto braked a little bit too late. Seeing this right here is pretty much always a disaster, but somehow they managed to stay safe. Neither of them got a penalty, but Mikey did lose that position. He could have closed the door here. He absolutely would be well within his rights to close the door here, but he was extra nice to me. And since I got that bump from Wya's game, I was able to then just get up to Girthquake and give him the bump draft. Mikey Moto then gave me a bump draft. I don't know why, but I thought that might be the perfect opportunity to pass Girthquake. And the reason that I chose this car over the Mustang or another anti-meta car is because this car actually has a higher top speed. Unfortunately for me, it wasn't quite early enough, and like I mentioned before, Girthquake is very good on the brakes, and so he was able to defend his position quite expertly. Jumping forward once again, this is actually where things get really fun when you're racing with your friends. Obviously, when you're racing with your friends, you're going to be working together for the most part, but if there's an opportunity to pass your friend, you're going to take it. So this is a fun game where you bump draft your friends for as long as you feel like it, and then suddenly, when they're ready for another bump draft, you don't give it to them. But right now is not that time. I gave him another bump draft because we're only halfway through the race, and it definitely makes sense just to work together. Now that isn't to say if you pass your friend, it's not working together, because of course they can bump draft you, and if you have any more laps left in the race, then of course they can just pull off that same move on you. However, I was confident that if I got in front of him, even on the long straight, I would be able to stay in front of him because this car, like I said, has a much better top speed. There are, however, many more tricks you can employ, and I didn't realize it until later. I had a sneaky suspicion, but it was confirmed later. Girthquake let me pass so he could then just save fuel behind me. When you take fuel, even if you take a little bit of fuel, you're actually costing yourself a few extra seconds. The animation of just the cars getting the fuel put into them adds time. So even if you add 1% fuel, that's going to be more than a full second than taking no fuel. It's in races like this where fuel saving strategies can become very, very important. Jumping forward to the end of lap 8, that is when most of the people driving the Ford GTs are going to be pitting, at least the people who didn't pit early on. Unless you save a lot of fuel deliberately, then you're not going to be able to make it any more than 8 laps. In the Ford GT, that is. As you can see, he only had 5% fuel. I had 17, but if you look at Girthquake, he had 20, so he was definitely not going to have to take as much fuel as me. Actually, I don't think he had to take any, and I had to do a little bit of a splash and dash. Like I said before, even if I have to take a single % of fuel, it's going to be much longer than taking no fuel at all. And so, as you can expect, Girthquake is going to come out of the pits in front of me. It also didn't help that I was not quite fast enough and I took a little bit too much fuel, but of course it's better to have too much than not enough. Now, as I said before, I thought that I was going to be able to stay in front of Girthquake even when he had the slip, because this car's top speed is faster. But the last lap before the pits wasn't that good of an example because 1, we went to the pits, and 2, I had slipstream from Spazua. When it comes to passing in bump drafting races, timing is absolutely everything. If I were to pass then, I would have to go up on the bank, and I would probably not quite make it because I have to go that much further. But if I wait after bump drafting him once to the last moment, then I could probably pull off a clean pass just like I did. If I tried to pass even earlier than that, he would then just be able to pass me because he'd have my slipstream for so long before the first corner that, of course, he'd just be able to get that extra speed and get all the way in front of me before the braking zone. Jumping all the way to the end of the lap, at the bus stop, it's time to test my theory. With the 3 people ahead being 3 seconds ahead, it was going to be impossible to catch them. Girthquake was only a half second behind me going into the bus stop, and he got a better exit. As you saw from a couple laps before, Girthquake had the slipstream, and I was even further back than he is right now, and I was still able to get all the way in front of him before the braking zone. But because of this car's higher top speed, he was not able to get even next to me, just because of the car. And that right there is why the Supra GT500 is our anti-meta car of the week. As always, thank you very much for watching my videos. If you liked what you saw, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll be making another one of these guides next week. Thank you.